the real big story that I think we really got to address is Jan Blachowicz going in there. He's always the underdog. He's always counted out. But that man's jab and composure in there was brilliant. He mixed in the takedowns, and I picked him to win. And nothing against Adesanya. I think he's a fantastic champion. I think he's going to reign over that middleweight division. But Jan, bro, the dude, right? I mean, this guy goes out there and flies out every time.
He looked phenomenal. I mean, and for me, I was on the other side of things. I had picked Israel Adesanya in that fight. I thought Jan was a little too flat-footed. I thought Izzy would move around, attack the weak sides, and just not put him away, but I just thought he'd cruise his way to a decision and do it fairly well. And Jan showed new wrinkles to his game with the wrestling, but I think what stood out more than the wrestling is throughout the fight, like you said, the consistency in the jab upstairs, the jab downstairs, and there's no load on it. And so essentially anytime I always say that you have to react to Israel Adesanya's fakes and his feints because he can change that half a second feint or a fake into a strike. So you have to take the bait on him. And he did a good job addressing those and stepping in and landing the jab. And that's what set up the blitzing combinations. That's what set up the wrestling later in the fight. Just a brilliant performance all around.
Yeah, brilliant performance. And there was a lot of talk of those feints during the broadcast, right? Joe, DC, and John were talking about those feints. But meanwhile, while those feints were happening, Jan's landing that jab. He's landing that right hand. He rocked Izzy a couple times, moved him backwards. But really, ultimately, the takedowns in the fourth and fifth were just, I mean, he was able to crush him down there. And Izzy, that's when you saw the size difference, right? He wanted to stay at that weight. He didn't want to bulk up to move up to 205 pounds. We're talking about a 20-pound difference. When the grappling starts happening, that's when it's really going to show its head for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would imagine the Jan Blachowicz weighed around 225 pounds going into that octagon. I'm sure Izzy still weighed around 200. Now, both guys split ways. They go in their respective divisions. Obviously, Jan stays at 205. Izzy's got to go back down to middleweight. What do you see next for Jan Blachowicz in this division? I mean, there's Glover Teixeira waiting in the wings. You had Rakic with a performance. I mean, where would you want Jan Blachowicz to go from here?
Yeah, Rakic, no. I think you got to go with Glover, who's weighed in, right? He was ready to step in there on short notice to take that title fight. The guy's always ready. I don't care what age he is. He's shown that he has still got it. Whatever adjustments that he has made recently in his career, his family life, his training, I don't know what he did, but he's just got this a rejuvenation about him. And he's hungry to get that title. He's been there before. It didn't work out. And I think he's really clawed his way back into that position. I think he deserves it. I mean, I don't think you can deny that guy. I think that's the fight that you have to make. And now, with that performance, right, that Jan put on and beating a superstar like Adesanya, now people will pay attention. Maybe if that fight happens that night, I don't want to say nobody cares about it because the MMA fans out there, the diehards, they do care, right? They know who Glover Teixeira is. But for the people that were trying to get more attention into this sport, that fight maybe would just fall by the wayside. Now people know that Polish power. They know who Blachowicz is.
Yeah, that's the win he needed. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. The Glover fight is the next fight for him. Glover is very deserving in the fight. He's put together some great performances in essentially the swan song of his career. Yeah. But this is the fight that needs to be made. And I agree. I mean, Jan, not a lot of people cared about Jan Blachowicz up until after this Saturday night. Now he's made a name for himself. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Now, on the other side of things, let's talk Israel Adesanya.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Like, do you feel like Israel Adesanya's stock dropped at all? Like, for me personally, I don't. I think that he took a chance. He went to up a division. It didn't affect anything that he'd already established prior to that. Essentially, you took a chance. Like, what do you think about Israel's stock and what's next for him? Like, what do you see next for him in the middleweight division?
Well, first of all, I agree. I don't think you lose stock when you like he would say, you go for greatness. You challenge yourself to be great. Sometimes you're going to have a slip up. You're going to lose. I think it's one of the best things that's probably going to happen to him in his career, because if you're going to lose the first fight that you're going to lose, why not be against the heavier champion? You're stepping up and taking this big risk. And yeah, it was a decision. He had moments of brilliance in that fight. He looked great. Early on in the fight, he was fast. The feints were really getting him off his game a little bit. But I think for him to go back down to middleweight, just stay there for a while. I don't think there's any big rush to try to be this double champ, right? That has kind of taken the UFC by storm right now. Whereas there's some other champions, Valentina, who wants to stay in their weight class and dominate over that spot. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, to just stay in your division, make that money, and just clean it out.
I totally agree. I'm a little played out with the double champion stuff. It's just divisions get backed up. I remember back when I was 155 pounds and we were dealing with Connor as a dual champion. It just, that's like you're in the same weight class. So it's like essentially guys are stuck in a logjam because it's like the double champ now gets to dictate where they go. And that can be frustrating as the competitor. It can be frustrating as the fan. It can be frustrating for, the people behind the scenes, the matchmakers and the whole UFC staff. But for Israel Adesanya, I think that it is best to stay for him at middleweight. You look right now, essentially, we have like this 8-man bracket that's all going to boil down to, we have big marquee fights. We got Whitaker and Costa. We got Till and Vettori. We got Holland Brunson. We have an 8-man bracket. We got Uriah Hall fighting Chris Weidman. Like these guys are all going to contend. There's a lot of good options for him. So I think for Israel, this fight just happened. Sit and wait. Let's see how these fights play out in April. And let this essentially, this non-advertised 8-man tournament take place. Let's find out who the real number one contender is. I think there's so many good fights for him at middleweight. I like that he took the chance to go to light heavyweight, but I still feel, granted he lost, not taking anything away from Jan Blachowicz. I think the tougher challenges are still at middleweight. When you look at those names I just listed off, those are all really tough fights for the champion. So I think he goes the route, establish your dominance by cleaning out a division, even if you have to do it 2 times over.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there's just perfect timing, right? The fact that you just named off all those middleweight bouts that are coming up. I mean, these are guys that are all contenders that are fighting to get up for that championship. So it also was the perfect time for him to step away. That fight made sense when you look at it, because you've got these big fights at middleweight that have to take place before you really establish who's going to be the next number one contender. So it worked out perfect for Izzy. Now you get to sit back, rest up from that 5-round fight, and watch all these guys play out, and which one of them is going to make that performance that stands out that you want to fight next. But another thing that before we get off of the topic of that fight, the scoring was a bit all over the place, right? Some judges were giving 10-8 rounds out. Dana was pissed off about that, and it feels that these guys are just being a little too liberal with these 10-8 rounds. I want to say, first off, I agree. I think that the 10-8 scoring system has gotten a little muddied over the last couple of years, and guys are getting them for a domination in a round, but not really beating the brakes off of somebody. I agree with Dana in the fact that I think you got to beat the crap out of somebody and almost finish them. The ref should be right there ready to step in before you get a 10-8 round. I mean, that's me. What do you think?
I totally agree with you. I think there is a place in the scoring system for the 10-8 round. Yeah. And I think you could simply get a 10-8 round from a knockdown. Like, you look at how boxing is. Like,
there you
knock a guy down, that's a point, So I think that with knockdowns, I think that's a little more clear cut. But when Jan won these 10-8 rounds from the ground. And that's kind of where I specialize in terms of my style of fighting. And there's only 2 fights in my life in the UFC where I've gone to a decision and not won 10-8 rounds. And I'll tell you how I won those 10-8 rounds. That's a true story. Aside from RDA and aside from Neil Magny, I've gotten 10-8 rounds anytime I've gotten a decision in the UFC. To get a 10-8 round on the ground, it's not that the ref essentially has to almost be stopping it, but it's got to be, you are putting on an onslaught. You are attacking submission after submission, and you're going into mount, and you're landing ground and pound. Like, for example, when I fought Francisco Trinaldo, I landed over 100 ground strikes in the first round from mount. That's a 10-8 round. You know what I mean?
I agree with you.
Diego Sanchez, I won 10-8 rounds on Diego by surfing on top and attacking chokes, landing ground and pound, going back to the choke. Like, I think I got off like 5 submission attempts in a round, and they gave me a 10-8 round. So I think that it just has to be pure offense and literally no defense from the person you're fighting, to the point where they're just hanging on. So I agree with you that they're a little too giving with the 10-8 round right now. And you got to go back to making that to where you have to literally knock somebody down, or you have to put somebody on their heels through a whole round to give them a 10-8 round.